Good evening, or good morning, or good night, wherever you are. For today's topic, we're going to talk about why the less qualified people are usually the most successful people and how to align yourself in that path. So, to begin with, I'm going to start with a story about myself. When I was going to school, in primary school or in kindergarten school, I'd always notice the cars that my fellow students' parents would drive. And it became quite popular that in my study, it was actually me and a friend of mine were doing, I'd noticed that it was almost like the dumbest students in our class, their fathers or their mothers or their caregivers always drove the prettiest and the fanciest cars. And at first, I was kind of shocked. And so I decided, you know what? Let me get to talk to these people. Let me make friends with them. This led me to becoming friends with one of them. In fact, two of them. And I started talking to them, hanging out with them. And after my quick discovery, it led me to a point that I had not anticipated yet. And this point being was that there was nothing different between me and them. You know, I'd always thought that because maybe their parents drove bigger cars or had the flashiest of all clothes, or because they smelt better, that maybe they had something or an upper hand onto me. But shockingly, I came to discover that not only did they not have an upper hand, but that in fact I was way smarter. I was way verbal than them, and I could communicate and talk and beat them in any test, you know? And over the years, I have seen repeated patterns of this. I have seen repeated patterns of less qualified people, less smarter people, less intelligent people going into different fields and shockingly becoming the richest, if not the most successful, among everybody else. And it led me to, as a grown up now, to actually dive in depth and try to discover, okay, I understand they're not the smartest in the room or whatever else, but why? Why is there a pattern? And I came up to this conclusion, which is that the brain of a smart person, you know, you know your stuff, you know your shit, is a disadvantage, all right, compared to somebody who's not smart. So I give you an example. For somebody who's studied in business, going to school for business, wants to start a business, the brain thinks, okay, there's a lot that goes into business. I need investors. What if my thing that I'm selling does not succeed? What if my stock that I'm trying to sell doesn't go anywhere? What if my produce, what if nobody believes in my dream? What if this? What if that? Because you're well read and because you know so much, you find that this becomes your limiting factor, that your intelligence is actually your limiting factor. While in success does not care what you have between your two ears, actually. Matter of fact, success is based on just starting. Success is based on motion. Success is based on the person who does it first. You know? It doesn't matter how well you do it. And so here's what it comes down to. You find somebody who's less successful, sees a job opportunity to be a manager somewhere. There's two people, one who's successful and one who's not. The one who's successful sees a job opportunity to become a manager somewhere and goes, oh, well, I know I'm not qualified, but because I'm not qualified, I'll just go ahead and apply, you know? The one who's successful, I mean, the one who's more qualified looks at this job opportunity and goes, heck no, nobody would hire me. I mean, I'm kind of a little bit smart, but I bet there's a ton of people out here who have applied for this job. And so I'm not just going to apply it, and does not apply. So what happens is the boss at the other side of the desk only sees one email in the morning, calls him for an interview, he rates the interview 6, 7 out of 10. He has nobody else to hire, ends up giving him the job. And this is just metaphorical. So what I'm trying to say is that in life, there's tons of different opportunities everywhere. I was going to start a YouTube video or a YouTube channel 2 or 3 years ago. I stopped myself, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, well, my accent is so thick. Well, this and that. Well, this and that. I'll start it later. Let me go to school first. Let me get finished at school. I'll start it later. In between those 2 years, I have seen a lot of TikTok influencers and YouTube influencers who have a way more thicker accent than me, who are way less qualified in terms of a lot of things. And I go, wow. And so this is what happens is the people who are less qualified, their brain triggers them to just do it because they don't have anything to lose, while the brain of the person who's actually qualified has a lot of hindrances. It has a lot of blocks and stopping points. It goes, no, you can't do that. You can't. It tells him, oh, you can do better, but you never end up doing better. So what you end up with is an unqualified person going ahead, doing something just for the sake of it, not giving it much thought. And because there's no other person or there's not a lot of people in competition for this, it ends up working, or he ends up finding a simpler way, and then he builds up on that, and then he builds up on that, and then he finally gets to a level where he's untouchable and he's actually so good. If you look at history, take a look at somebody like Joe Rogan. He has no degree in anything to do with podcasting, or he has no degree in anything to do with asking people questions or things of that nature. Ends up having one of the biggest podcasts in YouTube history. He thinks he actually interviews UFC fighters. Before that, he was saying that, I just love doing that. They told me, hey, come interview fighters getting knocked out and won't pay you, but it's fun. He did it. And then years later, he ends up getting paid big bucks for this. Look at people like Jane Goodall. She never had a degree. As a matter of fact, she never had an undergraduate degree. She went to college once, but she never had a degree in science or anything to do with, animals and that. She ends up being one of the pioneers, in fact, being renowned for her relationship with primates. What I'm trying to get at is essentially, you do not need to be qualified to do anything you like. You do not need to be qualified to get the dream job. You just need to go ahead and do it. You just need to go ahead and apply. If you're trying to start a business, if you're trying to grow an online account, if you're trying to start YouTube, if you're trying to go to school and do something, and you think, oh, well, I need maybe X and Y to catch up for me to be able to get somewhere. No. You just need to go ahead and start. And while you're starting, while the process is beginning, you'll find ways to catch up. It's like walking in water. You don't know where the step is unless you put your foot down in the water and you kind of keep tapping around to find, oh, where do I have a solid ground? Oh, where do I have a solid ground? Before you know it, you have a paved way in the muddy water for you to walk through, So you don't need to be specifically qualified in anything. If there's anything you want to go do right now, if there's any job, you know, if there's any content you want to post or whatever that you've been thinking, hey, you know, I don't think I can do it because of ABC. Just know that there's somebody who has way less qualifications than you have, and is going to make the most amount of money from it. And it got to a point where it pissed me off because I was looking at people in positions of power, and then you go talk to these people in positions of power, and you end up being the smarter one in that conversation. And it's not because he's smarter than you. No, it's just because of, you know, they took the position first. They had the guts to do it. They didn't limit themselves. The only locked doors are in your mind. You have to go ahead and just do it. You can't sit around and wait no more. Okay, so this is your sign to go out there and do it.